Use a mouse?
There we go. I use a mouse.
Who uses a mouse? I have a trackpad.
What? I've got this one doesn't work. Anyway, right, you're gonna have to edit this bit out.
I'm not going to. That's the beauty of this program.
Okay, hey everyone, welcome to Charting Change in Legal. We're starting off with our usual professional introduction. We're back off the end of Legal Week, the Legal Week show, and I have left my mouse in New York. I'm Caroline Hill, I'm editor-in-chief of Legal IT Insider, and I'm here with Ari Kaplan. Ari, do you want to introduce yourself?
No. I'm Ari Kaplan. I'm an analyst that covers the legal industry, and I'm ready to go. Carolyn, what did you think of the show? What topics were most interesting to you, and what really resonated?
So I'm literally just back off an airplane. So forgive me sounding like I sound like someone's gran who smokes 20 cigarettes a day. So apologies for my voice. It's probably like nails down the blackboard. But I thought it was a great show. It was really well attended. Loads of people there, lots of energy. I think for me, the overriding theme that everyone was talking about was GPT, not necessarily even GPT, but just sort of large language models and the impact that it's having across the legal sector. But obviously, there was a lot of e-discovery sessions, as there always are at Legal Week. So for me, that was the overriding theme. Did you get that as well?
Yes, it seemed like that was the theme, and luckily I had the chance to speak to both the users and the vendors, and so it was an interesting balance of what that means. Although I feel like it was nice to see a big theme this year, because in years past, there was the year when predictive coding kind of pounced on the scene. There was the year when legal research and kind of automated research was the thing. So it was fun to see something new and exciting for everyone to at least talk about. Whether they're implementing it, what the practical application is going to be, maybe a question in this early stage, but it was fun to see something that was thematic.
So they did a session on GPT the Monday when it's just sort of half starting. And I think they allowed for 200 seats in the GPT session, and then they had to open up another room and kick another sort of a very sort of small gathering next door out, because I think they had over 400 people attend that first session where they ran through. I mean, I don't know, it's interesting. So I spoke to in the run up to this conference, I've written quite a lot about GPT. I spoke to Dan Katz, who quite famously now has asked GPT to take the bar exam, and obviously when he first did it, it got 50. I'm not actually so familiar with the scoring system, but it did okay. And then this time around it passed with flying colours. And I spoke to Dan about trying to cut through the noise and what it really means, and he explained to me, I'm sure people listening in are now starting to become really familiar with this, but the open language, these large language models now get to grips with sort of does what it says on the tin. Whereas language has been the problem with AI and AI solutions in legal in the past, they've got over a lot of those issues, which means that this really is transformative. I think some people were still wondering about that, because obviously we've kind of instructed people in the past not to get overly excited about AI and not to be, and that we've warned people about hype, and we've said, but I think this really genuinely is deserving of the excitement. I do have my concerns, which I'll perhaps come on to. But yeah, I think it's wonderful to see so much excitement. With a big caveat of let's continue to be a little bit sensible.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think that the marketing sort of professional in me thinks that one of the key messages that I took away was pretty much add GPT or AI to anything you are doing from now on to generate a bigger audience. So I don't even care if it has anything to do with GPT. It could be, your child's birthday party. You're trying to get all the kids in the neighborhood to come. Just be like, hey, Susie's turning 6. GPT is going to be available. And before you know it, you're opening up the extension room and you're having a video feed into Susie's birthday because, wow, people are really into it. So I do think that there is an extreme level of excitement and enthusiasm. And you were lucky to talk to Dan. Nobody better to address this issue, who's really focused on where you can really see the progress, and that I think is a pretty meaningful part of this discussion. It's not so much to me, oh, we're using this particular open source application or this particular set of algorithms. It's that the accelerated nature of the progress is so interesting that within a month or 2 months or 3 months you see this rapid shift that hadn't happened historically in legal. And
No.
here we are where there's this beginning of the year something is announced, and then all of a sudden just a few months later there's this tremendous growth. I'm only curious to see what happens even at Clock in a few weeks, or at the ILTA conference in a few months, and
Right.
and then in the fall at other industry conferences. It's just super
Yeah,
interesting to me and exciting.
it's so true. I love the birthday party thing. That's great. Yeah, so I mean, just a few of the vendors. So Disco unveiled. They didn't actually specify OpenAI, and it doesn't have to be, right? Like everyone's talking about OpenAI. It could be something they're developing of their own. It's interesting that they didn't say. But anyway, so they're developing. So they've announced their own sort of chatbot, which will help you to investigate. Within the e-discovery process, the lawyers will be able to ask natural language questions to try and surface information. I think it's really early days to be talking about, how accurate some of the issues. There are obviously some issues that we need to keep humans in the loop. I think this is going to cause a lot of panic, as any new development does, where people are going to be thinking, is it going to take my job? And I think the answer is no. I think this is going to help people get to answers that perhaps we weren't getting to before. Is the reality. You're going to need to keep humans in the loop. There's going to be some impact, right? But and then so Disco's one was interesting, called Cecilia. Logical introduced its own ChatGPT integration, and Joseph launched Joseph Q. I just made a note of a few ones. And they're all really interesting. My big question was, so Microsoft. This wasn't obviously at the conference, but before the conference, it announced that it's launching Copilot, which, so law firms are talking about how they've almost like got this choice over how they interact with generative AI, or they have done. They can choose to work with a vendor, such as any of the ones that I've mentioned, or any of the others, right? But so then Microsoft, earlier in the month, at the beginning of March, it said that it's launching Copilot, which potentially, and these details are not yet, we don't know all the details, but they're saying that they're going to introduce its GPT technology throughout Microsoft 365, including Dynamics, and you can use it in Outlook, you can use it in Excel, and the question is then, and there's a lot of things that they haven't answered, but the question then for law firms is, okay, like, what does that mean for them in terms of governance and compliance? Like, and what if, I think they need to be asking a ton of questions, like, what in terms of what does that mean? If it's gonna be available, what does that mean from an explainability? Like, if people are using it, if associates are using it to create contracts and then they get sued, right? And then what's the audit trail look like? I think I'm not negative about it, but I just think there are so many questions that law firms really need to be asking, as well as being super excited. And I know I've heard of some, they obviously are asking questions behind the scenes. But it's exciting, and it's also like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, I was lucky to host a dinner with the team at SurePoint Technologies for an elite group of law firm leaders, both who are attending and both who are based in New York City. And one of the questions that came up was about policies and, how are people governing the use of some of these tools? What are the client expectations of it? And then there was an really interesting discussion about what is the base knowledge that people should be expected to know, and how should the companies that are providing basic AI, generative AI, there's a range of sort of applications here and a range of tools that people are using that they're incorporating, and what level of education should they be providing to law firm leaders, to corporate legal department leaders? And so there's an opportunity there. I also think that this issue of will this replace me? Will this take my job? I personally think is a very helpful conversation, because as someone that's been working for themselves for 17 years, I always think of this. If I'm a ghostwriter for a company and they bring on a content writer, I have been replaced. So the idea of will you be replaced, it comes up throughout your career. This happens to be, you instead of being replaced by a outsourced resource, or instead of being replaced by a more junior resource, or because you're senior to junior resources, or what have you. Everyone has been thinking about this. It seems scary, but it's much more of a creative endeavor and trying to figure out, well, if I'm writing, maybe I can do something else. Maybe I can add some audio or video. And so I've always tried to think of that. And so when this comes up, I just feel like, yes, there were some aspects of your work that will be taken over by technology in the same way that automation was taking that over, and in the same way that outsourcing was taking that over. And if you're not providing the kind of value that people want, you'll have to kind of reconsider what you're offering. And firms are doing the same thing. Legal departments are doing the same thing. And it's a moment, it could be a renaissance for legal when this is all kind of, this plays out.
Your point about value is really interesting. I think you're absolutely right about, I've spoken to press people, or lots of people in our world, where they're saying, well, it's for the sort of like the big volume stuff that ChatGPT can produce. It's amazing, some of the copy that it can produce. But your point about value is really interesting, because when you're actually doing it at a high level and you're interviewing people and you're getting their thoughts, this is something that can't be done by technology, but it can give you a really good starting point, right? If you've got a blank piece of paper and you say, hey, I actually used it. I haven't actually used. People have always said, have you written that with using ChatGPT? And the answer is I haven't done it. I probably should. Maybe on April the 1st, I'll write something. But it's a great starting point. I put in, can you compare, before the conference I put in, can you compare reveal and relativity? And then I had dinner with the head of knowledge, one of the American firms, and he went, oh, can you tell me what it said, because we're thinking about that right now. But it's obviously, it's kind of basic, right? It's a good starting point, but then you need the value of your understanding of the market and your conversations with leaders, and that you just don't get it from that.
I love that you're saying that, because I specifically produce an annual report called eDiscovery Unfiltered, where I interview corporate leaders and law firm leaders and ask them specifically, what do you think of this company? What do you think of that company? How do you compare them? Is this the right market grouping of this company? One thing that someone said to me with respect to AI, or I saw on LinkedIn, was that, I host a run at all the legal tech conferences
Because
that I
you're
attend.
mad.
Yeah.
And Ari's
6
run is
a.m.
at 6 a.m. So next conference that he's at, if you want to get up at 6 and go for a run, which he offered me the opportunity, and I said a very clear, no, thank you.
Yeah. Well, but people are always so polite too. I've mentioned this to you, that they'll come up to me, oh, I'm sorry, I missed your run today. Sounds like a great idea. And I'll say, oh, no, the run's actually tomorrow. And then they just pause for a minute and they look me in the eye and they're like, I'm sorry, I missed your run tomorrow. Like there was no expectation of them coming. And what has happened though is more people who say they're coming actually come. They plan, they bring their sneakers. But the thing that was so funny is that someone wrote, this is why being back in person is so great. No AI will replace the run. And I've just like had this vision of myself running with a bunch of robots. And I was just like, well, I guess then I thought, you know what? Maybe I just send a robot. That'd be awesome. I could sleep and I could host the run and everything would be great. So it didn't sound so
And
terrible.
the robot wouldn't get tired from having to run to the back, to the front, to the back, to the front.
Yeah,
like
that's right. And what kind of
right?
conversation do they think people are really having here at 6 o'clock in the morning? It's just like, oh, how you doing? I'm great. How are you? Great. See you later. Okay, bye. Actually, that's not true. The networking at the run is some of the best networking. I think anybody who goes will agree that there's a lot of fun conversation that happens.
So
After the first five.
I'd like to say I'm coming next time, but it's not true.
Yeah, I'd like to say the grandma that's smoking the cigarette.
Yeah. I'll be in the bar smoking my B&H, as you can tell. I do. I mean, it's gosh, it's so great being there in person and having all the conversations. And I think this GPT thing really has been energizing. I do think, just going back to that though briefly, like I think you mentioned it with your roundtable. I think that vendors, excuse me, have a responsibility to educate and to. There were a lot of press releases. And there's a lot of excitement, but I do think that this is the time to be really as transparent as possible about what it means in terms of client data and IP and all of those issues.
Well, I remember when I was thinking I've developed a software, it's called Law Accountability for Business Development, and I remember pitching a lot of the features, and someone said, pitch the benefits, not the features. Like, what am I going to get out of it? And so that's always been the mindset, but this, I think, is the kind of, it puts this in contrast, because in some ways you have to kind of go back. I see all the excitement and I see what you say that it's going to do, but I don't actually understand what you're talking about. I don't understand how, I don't understand the mechanics. And I think until people really have a better sense of that, it will be kind of, to many people, kind of quirky and kind of interesting. Oh, that looks good, but I have fundamental structural problems at our firm that are of a higher priority than whether I should incorporate some new technology that I don't really understand into our stack. And I think that's a hurdle, but not an insurmountable hurdle, but something that organizations are going to have to try to deal with at this point.
That's so funny. That's exactly what. So my colleague Neil Cameron, who was at the conference, said exactly that. He said there's so much stuff that firms are not doing on a very basic level that they really need to focus on that before they start worrying about this. But I do think that like with any kind of fad, all the lawyers. In fact, I got an email today from a lawyer who was asking me. He's at a conveyancing firm. Asking me whether how he would start using Harvey, which is the technology that Alan Overy is using, and if there's anything that anything that I could recommend in terms of ChatGPT, which is hilarious, But I think that's why I think that now's the right time for vendors to be saying, because obviously the issue, and this is perhaps not as relevant in e-discovery as in other areas, perhaps slightly less so, but still, with client data. They have to be really, law firms are going to have to be really sure that their client data isn't being shared with the public, like ChatGPT is publicly available. It will keep a record of everything. It will be, so there's so many issues in terms of putting, if you're actually using it with real client information, there are masses of issues around that, and they need to. That's where firms, I think, need to start putting some serious guardrails. Right? They need to stop their lawyers. Make them aware. They need to be raising awareness that this is not okay, and that because that's confidential information, and that there will be, unless they're using a legal, sort of a product that's been made specifically for legal, and that there's some kind of, that within the terms, etc. It specifically categorically says that client data is not saved by whichever company it is, whether it be OpenAI or whoever. Otherwise, that information would be being shared. And I do think I'm almost certain that that's happening already. And then obviously the other thing is about, for firms, they've worked really hard to build up their IP, and they are unwittingly training. They're kind of giving away their IP by if they and I do wonder about that, even with these legal models, these legal large language models. But anyway, I mean, obviously that's something that you can address with the vendor. But I think there are quite a few things that right now that the vendor should be addressing and educating on. I think there's a massive opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I'm independent, right? I'm Switzerland. I'm a completely neutral analyst of the industry, and I will say that I think a lot of the organizations in our space are doing a very good job of recognizing that there's this new technology, that it can do incredible things over time, that the potential is remarkable for legal, and they're showing that they have the sophistication and they are adapting to it. And I think firms and legal departments are, rightfully cautious about what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. I don't think it's a judgment call or an assessment of their willingness to be innovative. I think you're right that there are uncertainties that just will take time to work out. And this is played out in legal before. This is played out in the cloud. I remember the whole discussion. There were several years where the cloud was the thing. And should we move to the cloud? I don't know. Client data in the cloud is super scary. And there was a discussion about whether we use sort of some continuous active learning and whether that is we're gonna miss something, and the smoking gun is gonna get distorted by all this other random stuff. I just think that we're migrating data. What if we miss something? This has been a constant part of the evolution of technology, particularly in legal, because legal has a certain unique nature in terms of its data. Although pretty much every industry wants to protect certain kinds of data, so we can look to others. And in healthcare, they're maybe a little bit more advanced here. There are other spaces where they've kind of addressed this, and it'll be interesting to see how this evolves.
Yeah. You saying about the smoking gun, I mean, we can move off GPT, but there was a vendor that said that you can actually search for "show me the smoking gun." I was like, how would that work in practice? Like, what does that even mean? How does it know? Like, I'm sure, I think that might have been a little bit tongue in cheek, but
that's like the magic 8-ball. I got a magic 8-ball.
I know, right?
From SurePoint's booth, and my daughter will use this. She'll be like, "Is Hannah gonna get an A on the math test?" Unlikely. And then she's like, "Oh," she's like, "Is mom gonna get annoyed at dad about something?" Very likely. And I'm just like, is that what we're going to? That's legal tech has become the 8-ball. And so, I mean, to transition there, I think that it was fun, and I'm just a little bummed at myself for not spending more time walking the floor. A lot of energy in the exhibit area, a lot of different organizations. You mentioned that it tended to be over the years very e-discovery centric, but you saw CLM companies, you saw certainly excitement from editing tools and legal research and other things that seemed newer and showed how the industry is changing. But I didn't get everywhere, and so that kind of bummed me out. I was busy as you were, and I know next year my plan is to spend even more time walking the floors.
I always say that though. Like, I always feel like I don't get it right. I think it's because there's so much going on. But am I allowed to shout out my favorite demo? Do you think?
Well, let me just check with the people. Is she allowed to check out? Yes, you can, whatever you want.
So myself, and if I can give him a name check, Joe Patrice from Above the Law, we both were like blown away by this. So it's one of the reasons.
Totally name drop Joe. Now
Joe's
embedded in this.
Yeah, so Joe, if Joe's listening, Joe will agree. So there's a company called Liquid Text, which gave me a demo of if you're preparing for court, and then when you're actually in court and you're trying to. So this is only really relevant to sort of people involved in litigation, which, to be honest, a lot of people at the conference were, obviously, but that you can upload all your documents, your court documents, and then you can compare two at one time, and you can go to a paragraph of one where they say whatever, it could be your smoking gun thing, or it could be just that they say, oh, it took this many hours, and then you circle that and you can drag it to the right hand pane and it just drops it there automatically, and you can and then you can go to the second one, you find the paragraph which perhaps has got some contradictory statement, circle that, you can drop it, and you can draw a line. I don't know, I think maybe you kind of have to see this, but anyway, you draw a line between the two.
No, I totally get it.
And at any point during when the opposition goes, well, it took so and so hours, you just click on this line and it brings both the paragraphs up right in front of you. And Joe and I were like, what? This is so cool. It was really good. I mean, as a former litigator, I have to say, and I did do a lot of court work. And to be honest, I'm so old that mine was like fax system. I used to have to run to court with like all this paper, like reams and reams of paper, and just trying to work out where everything was, which was a nightmare. And so I think maybe with that lens, I'm just like, my gosh, it's so clever, it's just, it makes it so much more. And the only thing is that barristers obviously make a living from being quick and knowing, they've got brains that can retain so much information and where things are. And obviously that's, the high paid barristers, that's what they do. But this will open up the field potentially, to lots of people being able to do this kind of court work.
Well, I wonder, to come full circle, to go back to the AI point for a second, but to use your example of this demo, training has really changed in terms of this kind of, let's call it this fifth year generation, the generation of lawyers that were too young and too junior to go into a courtroom prior to the pandemic, and then kind of missed this 3 year window or so of actually getting there and just even delivering papers to the court, or even trying to get something adjourned, or something very simple like putting off a date or getting a deposition date, that they're less comfortable than others in their exact same position because of what they missed in person. They're probably more adept at certain things as well, but some of these tools are, maybe the answer for to accommodate some of those challenges. And that was another
Yeah.
thing that I thought was really interesting. There was a lot of technology that seemed to have the potential to supplement what's needed at this moment. Law is in a unique period. It's a sort of on a threshold here, and I think that Legalweek helped, level set in some way.
Like what sort of what does that mean? What sort of tech do you talk about?
Well, I think that all of the things that people are talking about, and in my conversations with the buyers of this kind of technology, whether they were in firms, whether they're in corporations, it was at Legal Week or within the past few weeks leading up to it, I just think that people are looking for ways to, supplement human talent, but also to accelerate some types of training, the creation of work product, their responsiveness, the ability to be more accurate. And there's no other way than to have this kind of hybrid of human talent and technological prowess. I think that otherwise, the value that people are looking for is just not. It's
Yeah.
We can't produce it to that extent.
Yeah, no, I agree. Um, I Yeah, I had someone come up to me at the conference. We did the cloud report, and we had some stats in it. And this is slightly tangential to what you was just saying, but it sort of triggered this memory. So
Why
the
should
guy,
that matter? Why should
well,
that
with
matter?
you and
That
I, Ari,
discussion to go off on a tangent.
gonna start. So, this guy came up to me at the conference, and he had it's always nice when you see people looking at the stuff you produce, right? So, and it was kind of a bit of validating, because you sort of sit behind your desk and then you send stuff out into the world. And he came up to me with some stats from a cloud report that we produced recently, and he's talking about task management. This is the human thing. It's slightly different to what you were saying, but he said it's not many people seem to be doing task management. I know this wasn't about the conference, but and that's one thing, a source of fascination for me in terms of the human side of things, that people seem to be still doing, being quite blind in terms of who's doing what and how. Like, your people are your biggest asset, right? People, like, humans are. And actually, that was the lovely thing about e-discovery. So to me, e-discovery, like, people come up more in terms of, it's a very tech heavy sector, but actually I did a round table where they were talking about the importance of relationships and how, you have to trust people. And a lot of the conversation was focused on the people side of things, which I find, I mean, it should be the way, and it was really refreshing. But that, a lot of firms are still being, they're not using task management tools. They're using old fashioned, emails and ways of monitoring what people are doing, and they really don't seem to know, which for me is absolutely, in this hybrid world where you really need to support associates, because obviously you want to make sure that everyone's getting work and you're developing them and you're getting the right people. And for me, that's one of the most surprising things of all. It's kind of
Well,
weird.
I'll stick by my prediction from earlier in the year and even at the end of last year, which is that the people who are really savvy in e-discovery are increasingly called upon to navigate what's coming next, because
Yeah.
they are the folks who have experience and skills in budgeting, in project management. AI and e-discovery is sort of long proven and well walked path. I mean, people are very familiar with this. And so those individuals are they're rising in firms in terms of their contributions and their seat at the table, but also in legal departments, and actually are, you start seeing them launching new companies. There was some interesting developments as a result of people having a certain level of experience and then rising into levels of leadership at existing organizations or starting new organizations. And so I look forward to seeing more of that because they're essentially being rewarded and acknowledged for their expertise in a rapidly changing market.
Yeah, that's a very sensible. We should really conclude on that, but can I conclude on one last thing?
Should we?
To
I
apologize.
have to go change my daughter's birthday party invitation. One second.
I want to.
ChatGPT.
I want to
Please eat
apologize.
cake.
So I did a round table, and this guy got quite grumpy with me because I was talking about he talked about Fitbits. It's probably very obvious if you're in discovery. This is a pretty obvious thing, but he talked about Fitbits being used as to prove time of death, and I got the giggles. I don't know why I got the giggles, and he got really grumpy because he thought I was laughing at him. But it had never occurred to me that that's another source of evidence, and that it would be used to record the time of death. So anyway, I just want to apologise to that guy for getting the giggles, and I wasn't laughing at you. It's just this was a new concept for me.
So, as you're talking, the one thing that is going through my mind is that, wow, is grump a good Wordle word? And then I thought, I'm going to mention that to my daughter later. And there we are. We have totally come full.
Yeah.
I have no idea what we talked about today, ladies and gentlemen, but this has been super fun as always.
And I will try to hang up without my mouse. Anyway.
Caroline Hill, a privilege.
Ari, always a pleasure talking to you. Oh my God. I need my mouse, but it's in you.